Value for money, the concept in public procurement. The value for money is based on balanced judgment of financial and non financial factors relevant to the procurement. However, this concept is much more difficult to define and evaluate it in public procurement due to involvement of large number of stakeholders. Asian Development Bank and one of the MDBs has done pioneering work in the area, which we will hear from the next speaker. Our next speaker is from ADP, Mr. Dharmesh Dawda. In his current role as a senior procurement specialist at ADB, assigned to South Asia Urban and Water Division portfolio provides knowledge, expertise, and oversight that ADB financing is used economically, efficiently, and is consistent with the core procurement principle in procuring works, goods, and services. He supported development of strategic procurement planning, implementation of procurement solution, and innovation to enhance value for money. Leads procurement reform to further enhance project efficiency, economy, quality, and value for money. Before joining ADB, Mr. Dwada has experience in delivering water sector projects from feasibility to commissioning in various capacity. I would now request Mr. Dwada to begin his session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Payal, for a kind introduction and good day to everyone. Payal, would you be presenting? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I can see my slides now. Thank you. Yeah. Uh, we heard through the morning from the presenters and panelists talk about value for money. And I present here on VFM, value for money from ADB perspective. It is important to acknowledge that value for money concept can be subjective in nature, and it's important to understand from whose perspective value for money is being sought, or perhaps that it must be looked at from many perspectives, finding the appropriate balance when designing a procurement strategy for a package or a transaction. In a project where there are multiple sub projects, contract packages, VFM may mean different things for different packages. In many ways, it is quite an abstract concept. VFM also needs to tie into a broader project and government objectives. As you may appreciate, there is no one definition for value for money. Through this presentation, I will discuss how ADB sees VFM concept in procurement and opportunities to achieve or enhance VFM in the procurement. Next slide, please. So, how do value for money and quality fit within ADB's core procurement principles? The value for money and quality have always been key objectives for ADB projects, and they are now formally included among the core procurement principles, along with fairness, economy, efficiency, and transparency. So, how does ADB define value for money? As there is no one definition for value for money, ADB has come up with their own definition. So, the effective, efficient, and economic use of resources, which requires an evaluation of relevant cost and benefits, along with an assessment of risk, non-price attributes, and or including total cost of ownership, which may be as appropriate for a project or a transaction. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, what VFM means conceptually in ADB. VFM is part of holistic procurement structure with three support pillars: efficiency, quality, and flexibility. By necessity, value for money is determined by circumstances particular to each procurement package. The factors which, in addition to cost, ensure that goods, works, consulting, or non consulting services procured deliver optimal benefits to beneficiaries through improved efficiency, quality, but while being flexible. Now, these factors may include, as you see, high level technology, maybe decreased transaction cost, uh, enhancing the efficiency, or specific performance criteria might be developed, or any unique economic or social conditions associated with procurement. It is important we adopt flexibility in the procurement process, which but making sure that these flexibilities still fits within our policy or the procurement framework by using principle based decisions with due focus on risk reduction and improved quality. The optimum VFM is where there is balance achieved between economy, efficiency, and quality, usually referred as golden triangle in project management area. And the two key principles of procurement, transparency, and fairness views across all the elements of this structure. Can you just press the next? Yeah, thanks. Okay, while we talk about this, we cannot ignore the time factor involved in the procurement. Time is very important element of VFM. When project is delivered promptly or when process is completed rapidly, it actually contributes to greater value for all the stakeholders. So anything which can actually shorten the procurement time or process uh, can actually accelerate the delivery of the development project. But one could argue that this is one of the elements that tends to suffer at times when we consider VFM. For example, the merit point criteria, if used as an evaluation factor, could lengthen the time for evaluation, but it may be appropriate or necessary for complex contracts, in which case VFM is achieved through other factors and not just necessarily by shortening the time or completing early. So it is all about fit for purpose and linking to project objectives. Next slide, please. Now, achieving value for money in procurement cycle. There are opportunities throughout the procurement cycle to more effectively, efficiently, and economically use the resources available to the project to achieve VFM, which has to be, again, I will revisit fit for purpose concept, which is very important when we are thinking about value for money, because there is no one size which can fit uh, you know uh, all the projects or all the contracts or the nature of procurement or the purchasing you are going to do. So what are the options to achieve VFM, and how do you actually intervene in the procurement cycle? So broadly, there are four key stages in the procurement cycle of ADB where we think VFM has a greater intervention. So it starts with the strategic procurement planning phase. Um, um, Developing the specifications, uh, identifying the evaluation criteria, and of course, during the implementation through management of the contract. Next slide, please. Now, the best opportunity for achieving value for money is at the planning stage of procurement cycle by developing the optimal procurement plan. Now, achieving good procurement outcomes depends how procurement activities are carried out. This shall be supported by conducting thorough strategic procurement planning and developing fit for purpose procurement strategy. The preparation of procurement strategy and plan should begin as early as possible, uh, because you see the ability to influence. to make any changes is highest at the planning stage, at a minimal impact on the changes to the cost, which is a known concept in any infrastructure or engineering projects. So it's so easy to actually change, and it costs minimal or nothing at a very early stage of the project or the program. So it's very necessary that the VFM thinking starts at the early stage during the development of the procurement strategy. The strategy and the planning process should consider very importantly project development objectives. It should consider the market conditions, the operational context of the employer, or in ADB's term, as my colleague earlier mentioned, we normally use borrowers, um, the previous experience of the organization, identifying the risks involved, what are the available options. So these are the different aspects to be considered when you're developing the strategic procurement plan. More importantly, these different aspects has to be underpinned by appropriate level of research and analysis to support the decision making process. You can find more information through our guidance note on strategic procurement planning, which dwells into much more detail step by step on each of these aspects. Next slide, please. How do you intervene with the development of specification and contribute towards value for money? So, generally, there are two broad categories of specifications: conformance based and performance based. Conformance based specification describes in detail how the technical requirements of the design, the method of production or construction, services, and or delivery uh, needs to be achieved in a particular transaction or in a contract. On the other hand, the performance based specification describes the outcomes, the results, or the output required in terms of business or functional performance requirement when deciding. So, when deciding between the conformance or the performance based specification, obtaining the best value for money may involve trade offs among, okay, how much time needed to create the specification. So if you see on the schematics on the x axis, you see the time required to create the specification is much more for the conformance based compared to the performance based. But then you need to also think about who is going to bear the risk, where the risk profile lies. What is the ability of the bidders to innovate in their response? Where does there is more opportunity for bidders to actually offer innovative solutions? Then taking into account what will be the complexity involved in the bid evaluation process. So there is no one answer. How trade-off, most importantly, you need to think about how these trade-offs between these elements is actually aligned to the project objectives and contributing to value for money. Next slide, please. Yeah. So building on further on from the specification side, thinking about the evaluation criteria and the value for money. Now, when we think about the evaluation criteria, the first thing usually comes to mind in public procurement is the cost. And without any doubt, it is the most important factor. But the question is, does the least cost always represents value for money? Maybe, maybe not. So it depends where, how complex the project is, how complex or high value or low value the contract is to be procured. And so it is important to ensure that the other factors are considered while you develop the method of evaluation. And that reflects the risk and complexity of the transaction. So, thinking about the cost, the quality, the risk involved, the sustainability aspect in the procurement, and the innovation aspect. As we saw there, depending on how the specifications are selected or identified, the more appropriate type of specification for a particular project or a transaction will actually feed into how you will actually look into to develop the method of evaluation, or how the evaluation criteria are defined for your project or your transaction. Next slide, please. So continuing on that, when we talk about the cost, and the evaluated bid price may also include the acquisition cost, the recurrent cost over the useful lifetime of the asset on a net present cost basis, including the disposal cost at times, is also known as the total cost of ownership. Sometimes it's also interchangeably called as a life cycle cost, or it's also often called as whole life cycle cost. Now, the life cycle cost can be adjusted or customized to reflect the project or the transaction objectives contributing to VFM. So, depending on what is really involved in your project or transaction, and as it was mentioned earlier in the panel discussion, the total life cycle cost or the total cost of ownership is usually considered as an evaluation criteria when you have more DBO kind of design, build, and operate kind of contract modalities used, where you would consider these um, as your evaluation criteria. So now ADB has almost 200 plus projects in their portfolio where a life cycle cost is used as an evaluation criteria. So it's not necessary that you go through exactly how each and every element of this total cost of ownership. Again, it has to be fit for purpose, suitable to the project objectives or the transaction, what you are trying to achieve. There is further guidance on the quality aspect and the total cost of ownership defined under the guidance note on quality, which can be found on the ADB website. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, continuing on the evaluation criteria, there could be other non-price criteria, which may be important and could contribute to value for money. So the lowest price, as I said earlier, not may not necessarily represent the value for money. Several non-price criteria may need to be considered during the evaluation, uh, which could be in terms of quality, how the responsiveness is to other social, economic, or environmental objectives of the project. And if the non-price criteria as part of the project development objective is critical, and if it cannot be monetized, then there are other methods like merit point criteria, which could be used to assess the bids using a scoring system. And the point-based criteria is developed around the criterias are developed and structured around those objectives to contribute value for money. Now, each criteria, it is weighted according to its relative importance, depending on whether it's social, environmental, and these weightings are disclosed in advance in the bidding document, so the bidders or the market is aware how these weighted criteria are going to be applied and how their bids are going to be evaluated. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide, please. So this merit point criteria facilitates the evaluation based on the technical merit, the quality, the risk, the price, and other relevant factors. Depends how it's been structured and aligned with your project or the transaction objectives. There is further guidance on the use of merit point criteria for the bid evaluation. Again, you can refer to the guidance note on ADB's website. ADB is also within this year is going to publish the further guidance on implementing these merit point criteria in water sector to start with, and maybe they may consider to publish in other different sectors in coming years as well, like transport, energy, which will help our borrowers or employers to actually uh, get the guidance on how to actually structure and implement this merit point criteria to which can contribute to VFM. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about, we started with the planning stage, and through the development of specification, evaluation criteria. And when you have, when our employers or borrowers have the contract in place, it is very important that contract is managed effectively to contribute to value for money. Because if the contracts are not managed properly, then it doesn't um, help borrowers to achieve their project objectives and achieve the value for money. So it require, but this contract management is the responsibility of the parties who are signed up to the contractual commitments in terms of time, cost, and quality to deliver this VFM. Both parties should fulfill their contractual obligation to achieve VFM and contractual results. The key performance indicators, KPIs, could be considered, or some milestone events can be considered as measures to monitor the performance and evaluate the performance of the contractor during implementation, for as a better or good contract management practice. There is much more guidance on the development of contract management and using contract management plan as a tool, which guides our borrowers during the implementation. Again, it's all available on the ADB's website for further guidance. Next slide, please. Right. So this is the suite of guidance note which is published on ADB's website. I've highlighted here value for money guidance note, but this is the complete suite of guidance note which is accessible and available in public domain. And I have highlighted through my presentation various other guidance notes which all contributes in achieving value for money through the procurement process, like contract management, merit point criteria, the quality aspect, procurement risk assessment, and others. So yeah, that's it. That's end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. Over to you, Payal.
It was pleasure listening to you. It was pleasure listening to you. There are couple of question posted here on the chat box. I will take one by one. The first one is, how is the sustainable procurement impacts the innovation of procurement or product itself, looking at the triple bottom line.
Um Okay, I'm not sure what triple bottom line means in the question, but I mean, in terms of sustainable procurement, impacts the innovation. Now, um, sustainable procurement, again, it's not necessary, and it has been mentioned before, it's not necessarily just about the green procurement. It is about the different dimensions of the project or the project objectives which is touched upon in a sustainable manner. So there might be the project objective which is to enhance or achieve the social objectives or environmental objectives through the infrastructure development. And if those elements of the project are brought into the upstream process of the procurement or through the specifications, then that constitutes or contribute towards sustainable procurement. Innovation, really, it depends. I will revisit my slide on the specification. So, depending on the needs of a project or the objectives of your transaction, uh, it is best to assess and decide the best modality to be procured, and where how do you fix your specification, whether you want to go with a very conformance based specification where employer is defining all the technical aspects, the delivery methods, the construction techniques, etc. Then there is very little room for innovation to be offered by the market. Whereas if employer is actually defining the output based contract or performance based contract, where they are focusing on what they are trying to achieve through this contract, and allowing market or bidders to actually offer much more innovation in the form of technical solutions or proposals through their bids. So it depends how you actually structure your bids.
Thank you so much. Now I'll take question number two. How to determine the life cycle cost in public health programs for procurement of goods, especially in the case of drugs and consumables.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very, very specific question to answer. When you talk about public health program, and it's difficult to answer with this limited information. But generally, as a principle, when you are considering the life cycle cost, and as I mentioned in my presentation, that uh, it is considering the life cycle of the asset or the goods. It could be goods as well. So when you are referring to the procurement of goods, so if you are purchasing any equipment or procuring any equipment, then you need to consider the acquisition cost of the good. You could consider the main recurring maintenance cost or any other recurring cost for that goods, for the life of that or expected life of that goods, and how then you developed an evaluation criteria and ask market or suppliers to meet those criteria. So that I think the principle still remains the same, and it needs to be adjusted as per your needs into what you're procuring.
Thank you. And now I'll take question number three. It says the question is asked is please explain the difference of VFM concept in public sector and private sector procurement.
Okay. I mean, I think the concept of VFM, it's all about achieving value for money. And in public sector, because you are dealing with public money, you are much more, I would say, focused or constrained when you are developing your procurement strategy, because you are answerable to public for you utilizing the public money. And every step of your procurement strategy has to be structured around the core principles of procurement, in terms of considering the fairness, the transparency, how you are utilizing the resources available efficiently, economically. So any whatever strategy is being developed for public sector procurement has to be underpinned by this core principles. um, Whereas on the private sector, um, it's really the how the procurement strategy of the corporate or the organization fits with the company's vision and mandate and their own organization policy, or how they perceive the value for money uh, through the procurement of the procurement cycle for their own organization. So I think the concept remains the same, but because you are dealing with the own private money versus the public money, you approach it in a different manner.
Thank you so much for answering couple of questions. I request participant to keep posting, questions in your chat window. Though we'll not be able to take all of them, but we will definitely share Q&A to everyone. Also, we will be picking up the first three questions received by us. Thank you, sir. Thank you for
Thank you.
this
It's
session.
been pleasure.